And welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. On today's episode, I actually want to talk a little bit about a video that Joshua the Green Shiz made. It was actually a pretty interesting video, and he had some pretty cool takes. One of the things he talked about during his video was he compared Pokemon prices with Yu-Gi-Oh prices. And I thought it was actually a great video. And I thought there might have been like a little more he could have expanded on. So I'm going to kind of play off of Josh's topic. If you guys haven't watched Josh's original video, I recommend you guys going, checking that out. It's a really good listen. But with that said, so Josh compares Pokemon prices. He talks about a lot during that video. Is he goes, man, what you can buy in Yu-Gi-Oh for the same price of Pokemon, it's just such a vastly different market, right? Like one of the things he talks about is saying, like 2003 product for us brings us into like the end of WotC. So you got Sky Ridge, Ruby Sapphire, Sandstorm, EX Dragon, like right around that timeline. If you want to go a little bit earlier, you could go to Aquapolis. You want to go 2002, you could go to like Expedition, and think about how much, booster boxes or packs or the hits for that timeline cost. And one of the things that, he proves in that video is Yu-Gi-Oh prices are nothing. But I was thinking about that and I kind of like, I was like, wow, he's right, because I'm definitely into some more dead TCGs. And for dead TCGs, you might as well, you could just get whatever you want, right? Like there is no barrier to entry. There are definitely a couple of these dead TCGs that still have like a little bit of life into them, but nothing crazy, right? And I wouldn't call Yu-Gi-Oh a dead TCG at all. So like that's not even a good example, but like I'm not super into Yu-Gi-Oh, but I understand like the other more dead TCGs. But then it got me thinking a little bit more. I'm like, and it's a topic I've kind of touched base a little bit on in previous videos. And I hate to do this comparison, but we're going to do it a little bit tonight. And this is going to be a quick video. But looking at the sports card market and looking at how that's developed, looking at the prices for some of these cards, and the more I try to do my little comparisons, and they're not one-to-ones, they're not at all. But I think it just shows how much potential Pokemon has to grow. And, you know, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure most, if not all, you guys have your PSA membership and you get your PSA magazine sent to you in the mail. And I'm sure you guys all just, put it on your kitchen table and flip through it real quick. And one of the things in the PSA magazine that's always there is, yeah, you have like your actual price guide in the back, but you always have like the advertisements from the big auction houses, whether it's Golden or Heritage or whatever. And they'll always show like some of the big sales they had in their most recent auction block. And when I look at it, it's a lot of like what you would expect for baseball. The big hitter cards are some of your, you got your Babe Ruths and your Lou Gehrig's and your Joe DiMaggio's. And then you go even older than that, and it's like Ty Cobb and Shoeless Joe Jackson. And then you get a little bit newer and you get into the 50s, and then you got your Mickey Mantle rookie. And then, go into the 60s, you got Nolan Ryan rookie cards, and the 70s, Reggie Jackson's, and then 80s and 90s. And then you start to see all these crazy like Derek Jeter prices for these super hard to grade cards. And then like, so you have that timeline, but then all of a sudden you just have this crazy jump up in price, and you like the 80s, 90s more or less get ignored with, like I said, those few key cards like those Derek Jeter rookies. And then you look at these modern cards. Yeah, a lot of them are like one of one. They're signature cards with, patch autos and all this stuff. But then the prices just jump crazy. So baseball is this weird thing too, where you'll see the vintage cards selling for crazy amounts of money, but then the modern cards, especially like Mike Trouts and stuff, are just hitting like millions of dollars. And then it's the same thing with like basketball. You'll have like your really old cards. You'll have like a Jerry West card, or then you get a little bit newer to late 80s and you got your Michael Jordans, and then you get to your, your modern cards, which are the one and ones, and then the prices jump again. So I was just trying to do like a little comparison just on the same pages, looking at the auctions and looking at like what some of these Pokemon cards are selling at. Some of these Pokemon cards are almost like the same thing in a way. You get a lot of these vintage cards. Obviously, the big guy who always shows up on like every single auction block is, your Charizard first editions, whether it's PSA 9 reaching over $20,000, or, you know, PSA 10 reaching over six figures, you know? So that's like your old stuff, but then you look at like what the modern market's doing. And what's the modern market doing is, you got your Moonbreons and some of your real hard chase cards, like real recently I've seen some sales for Giratina V Altarp in PSA 10s from Lost Origins, already hitting four figures, like over $1,000. That is like one of the most super modern cards ever. And sure, I think those prices are going to retrace pretty far, but the question is with pull rates, with demand, you know, I think we all look at the modern prices for some of these ultra modern cards, especially like the Moonbreon, which I've talked about. I'm not gonna like beat this horse because it's already been beat to death, but we've already seen what that price is doing with reprints and everything that's going on and how strong that price is really holding. PSA 10 Moonbreon defies all logic. And even if there is retraces for some of this ultra modern stuff, I always look at like now we're starting to build like these weird artificial price floors. And then artificial is even a subjective term at that. What does artificial even mean when you have such high demand? So you start to get into this real gray area now with like high demand and then the pull rates for some of this stuff. I've now watched so many booster box openings, whether it's, PokeRev's, what was it, 11-hour stream. He opened up 2,600 packs, or, just every other YouTuber, or, shout out to Rattle Pokemon. That dude's opened more Lost Origins on his channel, whether it's booster boxes or his crappy Pokemon openings or everything. That dude's just ripping through just about as much. I feel like I have never been as exposed to a set in recent times as I have Lost Origins. Like I've really come to really enjoyed the set, which I kind of already knew I was going to enjoy it. But, like the whole character rare subsets and stuff, and, decent chases and fun hollows and fun VMAXs and, some super playable cards, like all around, like, gives you that real good feeling. Like that's kind of what Lost Origins is doing. And I thought I'd be kind of burned out and be like, I don't want to watch any more openings, but it's still fun. Yeah, sure. I'm like tapping across, maybe going on 2x speed and stuff, but watching these openings. But it kind of just, goes back to, the topic of this video is when I'm starting to look at like, crazy prices for modern and then the vintage. And, it's hard. You can't really make these one-to-one comparisons with Pokemon and sports. But as I look through this magazine and I'm looking at the sales, there's one thing that is not really changing, and I think it's as true today as it is yesterday and the day before, is people always kind of talk like, the Pokemon market has really been, shaken through, or the sports card market has really been, shaken out. Like there's no sleepers anymore. And anybody who tells you that doesn't really know enough about Pokemon to be talking, because honestly, for the Pokemon market, it hasn't been shaken out enough. There are still so many undervalued sets, so many undervalued cards, so much potential in this hobby. And when I say potential, I'm talking looking through my PSA magazine and looking at just, recent auctions. You got Babe Ruth for $1 million, Lou Gehrig's for 672,000, Hank Aaron 173,000, Jackie Robinson 169,000, Mickey Mantle 103,000, not even his rookie card, just 1962 Topps Mantle. Yeah, these are super high grades, but that gets back to like the condition rarity and stuff, which is something we already kind of know about Pokemon, right? We know about condition rarity because that's like one of the driving factors, especially when you get to some of these real, I hate to call, vintage cards bulky, but in reality, they're bulky, with the exception of, you start to get into, condition rarity, especially when you look at like, I'll give you a perfect example, just unlimited base set, right? Unlimited base set. There are more unlimited hollows out there than any of us would ever be able to accumulate or absorb in 12 lifetimes. There's just so many. I mean, there's got to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of WotC base set hollows. But this is the thing. There's only so few PSA 10s, even in unlimited cards, cards you would think that there would be a ton of them, but they don't really come up very often. And in fact, when you start to look at like pop reports and stuff like that, these cards never come up. But I look back on these like condition rarity for these vintage cards, and the comparisons there are at least there. Again, the timelines are extremely skewed, right? To look at like how long does it take, vintage cards to appreciate versus modern Pokemon cards and stuff like that. But one of the arguments I hear against vintage Pokemon, and when I hear a lot of the pro modern conversations, is a lot of the pro modern conversations is, you know, I have a strong like bond towards base set, and probably a lot of people in this chat that fall within that age range and were kind of experienced Pokemon in 99, they have that same sort of like feel to it, right? That same sort of nostalgia factor to it. But the people that really love modern, they're saying, you know what? I think Sword and Shield is going to be like this super hot set because that's what people are opening now. That's what kids today are experiencing. Kids aren't experiencing that 99 Watsy stuff, so they're not going to like that in the future. But then I look at the prices of this, vintage sports stuff, and Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig's and Joe DiMaggio's and stuff like this. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Time out for a second. There is not a single person alive today who saw Babe Ruth playing, maybe you could find me like some 109-year-old guy who, when he was 5 or 6, his parents brought him to a Yankee game and he watched Babe Ruth play. But like, those people are few and far between, and they probably don't really exist anymore. And even like, your Mickey Mantles and stuff, when Mickey Mantle stopped playing, even Mickey Mantle probably stopped playing in like the early 70s, maybe like early 70s. So even if he retired in 72, that's 50 years ago. That means people who would have actually seen him and would actually remember seeing him would probably have to be in like their 60s plus. So even that argument isn't as strong as some people would think. So I just think about that as Pokemon is like, what are people going to go back to? What are people are going to want to collect? They're going to want to collect this, historic stuff. And that's the thing about this hobby, right? This hobby is just so new. We aren't even on the cusp of anything in this hobby truly being historic yet. We are starting to, though. When you think about it, there are cards that are starting to like get their own little niches, sets that are starting to get their own niches, cards that are starting to have the illusion or the feel of being historic, but we're not quite there yet. So that is actually super positive for me. And that gives me like so much faith and hope for the future of this hobby, is if you can start to really get that, right? You can start to get that historic aspect to this. And I do listen to a lot of Pokemon content. I really try to consume a lot because I do a lot of driving, like to and from work and whatever. And I just throw my earbuds in, especially at my job. Like I have the ability to, it's the same way people listen to music at work or podcasts. Like I just listen to Pokemon content while I'm still doing my job, and it doesn't really affect what I do. But I'm able to have my headphones in and just go about my day. So I'm able to consume a lot of content. And one of the things I hear a lot, and I forget whose live it was recently, but they were saying like, kids today, they're still loving like the flashy new stuff, your alt art cards, and even like the things we wouldn't appreciate so much, like V Maxes and Vs, like they still like all that stuff. But when they do see some of this, more vintage stuff or these, older Watsy hollows, they still get excited about them. And they're definitely not as flashy as modern day stuff, and they don't have the same feel, but people are still, really liking them. And then that kind of goes back to, when I talk about, man, there's some stuff in this hobby that just, given the right opportunity, given the right stage, given enough time, these things are really going to pop. And I was listening to Cam and James's podcast, CNG Emporium, and one of the cards they sold recently, and he asked on the live, he said, I just want to ask a question to the chat. He sold PSA 10 Raichu from Skyridge. Now, I forget which number Raichu is. I think it's like H27. It's like either H27 or 28 or 29. You have like the three. You have the Raikou, the Raichu, and then the Rhydon. They're all in order because obviously Skyridge is one of those easier sets to remember. Like you could always know what's H1 because that's Alakazam, just same way as base set. What's base set goes in in order alphabetically, base set, you got number 1 is Alakazam, number 2 is Blasty, or Blasty, number 2 is Blastoise, number 3 is Chansey, number 4 is Charizard. Oh no, number 3 is Clefairy. Oh, Chansey, CH. Yeah. See, even I got to do like and then so number 4 is Charizard, number 5 is Clefairy. So you just got to like do the alphabet in your head, and then you can work your way up, because all the way till you get to the end, which is number 16, and that's Zapdos, because Zapdos starts with a Z, and then Raichu is number 14, and you got all these cards in between, right? Like, and as you do the alphabet, you could just figure out each one, and it's the same thing with Skyridge. Sorry, it was a little tangent, but he asked the question in the chat. He goes, "How much do you think a Skyridge Raichu Hollow sold for in a PSA 10?" And he talks about Rev's most recent Skyridge breaks. He sold packs at like $1,500 a piece. That's what a single pack of Rev's Skyridge break was. And yeah, they were able to pull 4 crystal cards, only 2 of them being hollows. One of the hollows being the Crobat, the other one being the Golem. And both those cards, even if they hit 10s, are extremely cheap in comparison to the pack prices. But he said, "How much do you think is a PSA 10 Raichu from Skyridge?" And he asked the chat, and the answer was like $450. That's what that card sold for at auction. That's one of the 32 hollow hits, not including crystals. So that's a $1,500 pack. And yeah, it's hard to really compare sealed pack prices versus hits, because you're always going to have the outlier, right? Like the outlier card that if you hit that one card, it drastically like skews the price of pack, or the value of that pack. Same thing with like a heavy base set pack. Heavy base set pack, you only have a 1 in 15 chance of hitting that Charizard. But if you hit that Charizard, assuming it grades at minimum a 9, you're at least going to break money. Hit a 10, you win the lotto. And it's the same thing in a way with Skyridge. Like you hit that Crystal Charizard Hollow, you hit it in a 10. Most recent PWCC auctions are selling between like $13,000 and $15,000. So yeah, you hit those, you hit it big. So like, of course, that price is factored in, but it still, in my opinion, shows like these cards in some sets are still relatively undervalued for like how the market is valuing these things. And sure, I know a lot of you guys are probably out there saying like, "Oh, PK talks about Skyridge all the time." Like we've heard it enough, but you look at like the most recent heritage block. Most recent heritage block, you still have like your obvious booster boxes that fetch a decent premium. You have your Team Rockets or your jungle, like the things that there is just a million of these boxes for. But then you'll see like, oh, what do they have for Diamond and Pearl? Oh, Majestic Dawn booster box. What do you think a Majestic Dawn booster box sold for? Wait, $9,000? How much of that $9,000 is for the sealed premium of that box for people just want to be booster box collectors, and maybe they were missing, a mysterious Dawn booster box in their collection? But when you start to look at that, and then you say, well, what's in Mysterious Dawn? What makes this set valuable? And then you look at the prices, and you look at what these cards are selling for raw, and you look at what these cards are selling for graded. Sure, there's not nearly the 10 population that could potentially hit the market in the future, assuming some of these cards that are worth it the grade. But that's the thing, like you start to look at the prices of these cards, they've already kind of like dictated to the market that yeah, we are worth grading. So it's just, but it's like that for every set, right? Every set you start going through, right? And you start just looking at the cards in the set, comparing them to the prices. And it's funny, like people are saying this market is, really slowing down and dying down. And it is, and it isn't. There are definitely parts of this hobby that are not slowing down, especially the more niche stuff, like the things that are not as, plentifully available. You can't just go out and every time you type in, vintage Pokemon or Pokemon, you get a million listings and it's always the same stuff. This more mid-era stuff, the more niche type stuff, the things that are actually pretty hard to find. And when you do see a binder collection, or you do see somebody's collection and they start to pull out some of these cards, you kind of like sit back and you look at it, and you gotta, for the most part, I could probably pull out any hollow from any WotC set from 99 to 2003. And if I pull that card out, there's probably like a 90% to 100% chance you could instantly identify that card. But as you get to like, your diamond and pearl timeline and like pull out a hollow, you might look at that card and you might, double guess that and then say, wait, what set is that from? Or even like a more popular card like level X's and stuff like that. I start pulling out level X's and you look at it and you go, wait, what set's that from again? Is that, is that Secret Wonders? What is it? And once you start to do that, because they're so few and far between, right? They're not just flooding your eBay feed every time you log on. So it goes back to like, if you believe that Pokemon can grow, and that's the thing too. Can Pokemon grow? I'm about as biased as you could possibly get. If you put, 1,000 people in, 1,000 random people in the room, I'm probably going to be like one of the most engaged out of those 1,000 people, unless maybe one of you guys from the chat randomly walk into that room. But out of those 1,000 people, you probably have 990 of those people not even know like the Pokemon market is what it is, or would never be able to understand or justify it or make any kind of sense for the prices and the hype and the excitement we get for Pokemon. They would just, that thought to them would be such a foreign thought that they wouldn't even be able to comprehend it. And that goes to 990 of the people in the room. And then maybe the other 10 could kind of like understand what you're doing, but I would still be in like the 1%. I would be the 1 out of 1,000 that is the most bullish on Pokemon in the entire room. So we can't lose fact of that kind of stuff too, that we are definitely in this minority of a minority of a minority of a subset of like the entire collector base. And that's the same thing. Like you could go and look at your Targets and your Walmarts and, your Reddits and all these, Pokemon groups. And we surround ourselves with a lot of like-minded people. So, we're definitely looking at this hobby, extremely different than everyone else. Everyone doesn't have the same sort of mindset to it. But now this is the thing, and this is the thing why I talk and I'm so hopeful for the future, is because every day that goes by, there's, a couple more people that are becoming more engaged. A few more people are going deeper down the rabbit hole. That true core group is growing at a pretty crazy rate. And one of the things I've really noticed more than anything else is some of the people that I have found who have been some of the most engaged in this hobby. And to be honest with you, like some of the people I've had some of the best conversations with recently, because they are still excited about this hobby. They are not just like, in a way, like overly jaded on too much stuff, are the people that just joined this hobby, call it 2020 and prior, and sorry, 2020 and post. So anybody who joined after, I don't know, January of 2020 would fall within that group. And I start to talk to these people and I'm listening to what they're buying and I'm listening to their stories, because these people are starting to have like stories that are way better than mine in that same timeline. Like my story in Pokemon in the first 2 years, the 3 years of me collecting, is extremely, extremely boring compared to these guys. Listening to the cards they're going after, listen to the sets they're tackling, listen to like the way they're grading, the way that they're sourcing cards, listening to these guys. It's, I mean, it's not even like, it wouldn't even be a fun comparison, but I'm listening to them talk and I'm saying, oh my God, you guys have just got in 2020 and you're doing all these things. I've heard people talking about like starting to make their own businesses, starting to, want to source product, like directly from Japan, or people talking about like now moving into getting distributor agreements and, growing their collection that way. And I'm just listening to these guys. I'm like, I would never, never in a million years have been anywhere as close to where these, people are, and their knowledge and their sets. And listen, but again, it keeps going back to like, what are they buying? They're all over the market too. They're not just buying like the modern stuff. They're not just buying the vintage stuff. It's insane what they're buying. They're all over the place. They're going into like black and white stuff, and they're the age groups too. The age groups I just assumed would be in that 30 plus year age group, like you either had to be in second to sixth grade in 99, and like that's a pretty small window when you think about like people's lives. You have to fall within a couple grades within a small timeline. And listening to these people, I'm like, and what their ages are, some of them are, you know, 20, 25 years old, 22 years old, 23, 24, listening to what they're doing in this hobby. I sit back and I'm like, whoa, this hobby has this weird potential for growth that is, we can actually see this hobby like multiply by double. And that is so counterintuitive to every single thought that should make sense for this hobby. To say that the Pokemon hobby as a whole, especially like, and when I let me rephrase that a little bit, the Pokemon hobby that we live in, the niches of the niche, the fact that our niches of the niche can double. And everybody would say, oh, the market's crashing. The hype has died. Product is available on the shelves again. Everybody can't be like Scalper McGee over there clearing out their Walmarts and going on to some streaming platform and opening up packs for $10. Like that's dead. The hobby's dead. Like once the money dries up, everyone else dries up. I don't know. That makes sense on paper. Like I'm sure that's probably the same of every single hobby, every single fad, every single bubble. And that's a word people want to throw out too. They're gonna be Beanie Baby bubble, Beanie Babies. I don't know, give pogs or like some crazy thing. Like people will just throw out like bubble, or they'll say like pull up bubble. It's just anything that they can say. But it's weird because I'm continuing to watch stuff double and triple. And now this is the thing. People will hear that and say like, oh, now you're being way too positive. There's no way you could be this positive because the hobby as a whole has died. And then they'll start to show me indicators, right? And price retraces and, what things are selling at now versus what they were a year ago. But sometimes those prices are so, you can't, and this is the hardest thing about Pokemon, you cannot talk about the hobby as a whole by talking about prices. You have to look at every single sale individually, break it down. And what was like the thought process, or what was the reasonality behind that price change? I'll give you an example, and it's something, like Dan Catchmall Collectibles, and I'd say probably like 30 other YouTube channels, including this one, talk about all the time, is first edition Pikachu from Jungle. That card was selling for over $1,000. Now that card's selling for like sub $200. And if you looked at that one card, you'd say, holy crap, the entire hobby has dropped down 80%. But that's it. When you look at that card and you ask anyone, and I literally mean this, you ask anybody that's in this group, in this niche, every single person will tell you that was a stupid price to begin with. And that even the price it's selling for at now is probably still a stupid price. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that price retrace even more. I think there's probably a floor, especially on a Jungle First Edition Pikachu and PSA 10. That floor is probably like $50. And I'm sure there's even some people out there will go one step further and say even $50 is probably overvalued for that card. But I think I'm going to be generous and say like $50 is a sweet spot for that card. That's a spot I actually like that card, But people will find these like little teeny outliers. But then you start to look at some of the stuff, especially sealed product, vintage product. Oh my God, like I think about a base set pack, just unlimited base set pack. How many freaking unlimited base set packs are out there? How much are they continuing to sell for today in 2022? And then when you look at, well, what was that same pack selling for in 2019? And you go, oh my God, look at the price of this pack in comparison for just such a small truncated timeline. The hobby died. Why is this pack still expensive? Why are Skyridge booster box selling for $50,000 still? Why are Majestic Dawn booster boxes selling for $9,000? Why are base set boxes selling for $12,000? And then they'll look at that 30,000 and then see it drop down to 12. But then what were that same base set booster box selling in 2019? And then you sit back and you think about it and you go, oh, wow. There's a lot of things that definitely retrace, but a lot of things that retrace make tons of sense, right? Like some of the stuff that retrace is the most obvious stuff in this entire freaking hobby. Oh, yeah. The whole topic of this video was to go back and just saying, like, if all that's true, and if I can do the comparison to sports, which people won't want to hear this because, like I said, sports isn't an even one-to-one, and we've tried to have this conversation in the past. I've had, JT he was a former executive at Upper Deck. We've had him on this we've had him on this channel twice and tried to do this comparison, and it's always pretty tough because they're not even one-to-ones. But I just look at sports and I look at the market share, and as I go through my PSA magazine and I could just go to any auction and see like, oh, well, what was a big sale for a sports card? And they're selling, these cards are selling for over 500,000, getting close to $1 million for like so many of these cards. I think to myself, I said, what if Pokemon could just capture the smallest amount of that market share? Just probably populations for 1932 Topps cards for baseball, probably just that population and the dollar amount that's associated with that probably surpasses this entire hobby combined. Is just one set from 1932, where you probably go back even further and then you start looking at like the T206 cards with like the Honus Wagners, and yeah, that's like an outlier because it's supposed to be a super rare card, and how many of those exist and the prices so sell for, and it's just like that's just a fraction, of the entire sports card market. But that little fraction, those T06 cards from 1909 or whatever year they're from, encompasses this entire hobby's dollar amount and then some. So if Pokemon can do that and we can continue to, pull a little bit of, the market value, a little bit of the market share from sports, some of that money feeds into Pokemon on a percentage basic of money that would need to leave sports to hit Pokemon. The percentage of that from sports is probably really little bit of money in comparison. But then if you add it to Pokemon, like the hobby 2x's, the hobby 3x's. And when I go through my PSA magazine, it's sports. And then as I flip every month, every time I pull up more and more articles like this, and it's just pages devoted to Pokemon every time, even things as awesome as like, the snap cards from Blockbuster, people are great. And like, even those make it into this PSA magazine. And I'm just like, okay, this magazine goes out to the top 1% of all just trading cards, sports card investors in the world. That's what this is. This is PSA magazine. In order to get this magazine, you have to add a minimum, pay $100 a year just to have, your membership to PSA. Even that now brings you into a smaller bracket of how many people are willing to even spend $100 for a membership just to have your cards graded. Like when you look at the hobby as a whole and you just get to like this low point, or like this smaller section of the hobby, and I'm like, oh, wow, they're even advertising all this Pokemon cards to the most, the richest people in the world. And then I start to go back to conversations I've had in the past where I say, man, how much money could be in this hobby in the future? Because sports cards always was valuable, on your high end, but we've really seen what the market has done in recent times. And one of the big changes in recent times is the money coming in, because a lot of the sports card people who have that real big dollar amount, there aren't a lot of those in our age bracket. Call it 28 to 35. There's not a lot of high-end sports card guys in that bracket. They definitely exist the same way they exist in Pokemon. But when you start to look at these 50-plus-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, and start to really see where a lot of the money in sports is coming from, it's from this older age demographic. And our hobby, we just aren't there yet. Like I told you, sports is a historic hobby. There's historic cards. Pokemon is just not there yet. We are not a historic hobby yet. We don't have like, historic cards in the true sense of what a historic card is, because our hobby's still so new. And right now, in 2022, the hobby is not slowing down. The hobby is just moving along. It's just this train on a track. There's no stopping it. Get off the tracks, because if you're on the tracks and the train's coming through, like, you're just going to get squashed. And I'm so I tried to do two things. I try to like be very bearish and very bullish, but this would be one of my more bullish type videos because I'm so like internally happy and so internally like just supercharged about this hobby. One of the things that have been extremely great for me, and especially when it comes to my engagement in this hobby, is obviously like doing content, watching more videos, engaging with you guys, because the more engaged I get in this hobby, the more I'm still discovering. And it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. The things I'm discovering more than anything else is I'm discovering this community at a much, you know, greater scale than I've ever experienced it in the future, or in the past, I should say. And looking at what the future of these new collectors are, I'm just like, yeah, it would take something that I can't even like comprehend, and I can't put it into words, what it would truly take to be able to evaporate this hobby after how many people I've talked to and the engagement that these people are at. I don't know. I don't. I cannot like comprehend it or put it into words what it would truly take. So yeah, it's a fun time. It's interesting conversation. But I told you when we started this live, I wasn't going to make this a long live. I know there's some other people doing lives at the same time. I didn't have this one planned out like ahead of time, but I did have it planned out in my head ahead of time. So I just wanted to get a few things off my chest. And one of the things I strive to do on this channel, one of the things I strive to do is just give you guys content to listen to on, throughout your day. Whether it's at work or on your drive to work, you just throw your earbuds in and maybe this is something you could play on in the background. And yeah, that's about it. But other than that, guys, appreciate every single one of you guys. This is always fun. I'm glad I got to get a lot of this off my chest and just get some of these thoughts out of my head. Otherwise, it just gets a little too crazy for me. But other than that, guys, I'll catch you on the next video.